Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Thursday, September 13, 2018 meeting of the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority. Roll call, please, Ms. Allison.
Commissioner Staunton. Commissioner Fisher.
Here.
Chair Hovland.
Here.
Commissioner Brendel.
Here.
Commissioner Stewart.
Here. I was wondering what that word was.
I was going to say hello. Who knows what was coming out?
Member Stewart is here. All right, we've got a form of meeting agenda in front of us this morning. Is there anyone that wishes to modify the agenda? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to approve the meeting agenda as shown.
So second.
Got a motion and a second to approve the meeting agenda as shown. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Community comment. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the HRA on a matter that's not otherwise on the agenda this morning? Okay, seeing no one coming forward, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Is there anyone on the council that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? Hearing no such motion, is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
Second.
Got a motion and second to adopt the consent agenda as shown. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. We've got a little sequential issue this morning that doesn't happen too often, but once in a while we go into a closed session to have a discussion about something that we're permitted to do under the state law. And Manager Neal, do you want to talk a little bit about the process?
I do. Thank you, Your Honor. As you mentioned, we don't do this kind of particular sequence very often where we open a meeting in kind of open public session, go into closed session to discuss an action that we're permitted by state law to do, and then to come back into open session. We don't do that very often because the logistics are complicated. We don't have what we consider an adequate recording system in the mayor's conference room. So we're going to take you upstairs into the community room because we do have a very adequate recording system there. We have to make a recording, an audio recording of the meeting by state statute. That's important. We got a quality system up there, so that's where we do our closed sessions. It's more typical for us to just close out the meeting right after that closed session, but we do have a couple of items to come back into public session. So after that, the plan is to come back down here, resume these seats, and finish the meeting.
All right, very good. Member Stewart.
Thank you. Manager Neal, I think this order on today's agenda was set up because of constraints in my schedule, and we wanted to get to the closed session items first, and then the constraints on my schedule have changed since this agenda was set. I'm wondering if we shouldn't proceed with all of the open agenda items and then switch to the closed agenda after the conclusion of that, since my world has changed since yesterday.
That's true. That's true, and there isn't any logical reason why we couldn't do the second half of the open session after this, if you want.
Okay. Other folks' thoughts about? Yeah, I'm just looking again at the agenda. We've got a petition that we're receiving under correspondence. Some HRA Commissioner comments, Executive Director comments after we move back. This would be after we move back into open session under the existing agenda. Project update from Mr. Neuendorf, I think, and then clarification on the HRA position, and then the Edina Housing Foundation Board of Directors vacancy. I actually kind of like the way the agenda is set up now, with us being able to handle those other items after the fact, but I'm sensitive to schedules too. So I know you were, Member Stewart, trying to accommodate us, or you were concerned about the schedule because of your conflicting court schedule. Now that that's changed, I'm still not sure we need to change the agenda, but I'm certainly willing to talk about it and amend it.
The only item, Your Honor, and HRA members, that does have a logical sequence to it is that there's a possibility that you could take an action on the 5146 Eden Avenue item that you're going to have discussion about in closed session. You can't obviously take an action
Right.
in closed session. You have to come back out into open session to do that. So that's an item that does need to follow.
So it causes me to think about whether we want that to be the ending item of the morning or sequence into those other items. And I don't have any particular preference.
My only thought was there's a fairly sizable public audience here today, and certainly would be helpful to most of those folks, I think, if they wanted to listen in on the open session parts, if we got to that right away, and then switch to the closed session afterward, just in the interest of keeping the public engagement.
Well, if you want to make a motion to amend the agenda to handle sections, let's see, what would we want to do? I think we'd want to, pardon me? I think the substantive, yeah, we'd want to move 7, 8, 9 ahead of
Yeah. 6C and D would be pushed to the end.
Okay.
Okay. All right, that's your motion?
Yes.
All right, so we've got a motion to amend the agenda to move the 6B and related items subsets to the end of the agenda prior to adjournment. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
All right, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, carried. All right, so let's hold off on 6, which is where we were heading next, and we'll move down to correspondence. Manager Neal, Ms. Allison, anything? We've got any other correspondence we received other than the petition from the Centennial Lakes Townhome Association? All right. So 7A requires action on the part of the HRA. Is there a motion to receive the petition from the Centennial Lakes Townhome Association?
So moved.
Second?
We got a motion and a second to receive the petition from the Centennial Lakes Townhome Association that's been previously filed with the HRA. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. No additional correspondence. Any HRA commissioner comments that we want to deal with now? All right. Executive director comments. Anything you want to cover?
Thank you, Your Honor. Yes, there are 3 things. First is the project update. This is a project update that Mr. Neuendorf prepares. He had this in the last packet, but if there are any questions on any of these items, we'd be happy to answer them for you. Second item that I'll go over just very quickly is item C, actually, on my list, Edina Housing Foundation Board of Directors vacancy. The City Council appoints the members of the Edina Housing Foundation Board of Directors. There are 5 members. They serve 3-year terms. Recently, Doug Mayo, who's been a member of that Board of Directors for a long time, he's served 5 terms on the board, moved out of the city. There is a requirement that Board of Directors members live in the city of Edina. Doug was in a term that expired on March 1st of 2020 going forward, and he is an HRA appointee. So the HRA appoints, I think, 2, and the council appoints 3. I think I had that right. So the question we have is the process of how you would like to go about filling that vacancy. It's a long-term vacancy, so I would recommend that we do fill it. The foundation is very busy. They have an aggressive line of work right now. We could do an open call and have a kind of a special selection process that's modeled after what we would do for other boards and commissions in the spring, but do it now. Any input from you on that?
Member Brindle?
Thank you. The last time we seated a person on the Edina Housing Foundation, there were several people who applied and were interested in that position. Are we still in a time frame that we can consider those applications and contact those individuals?
So the concept of who's on the bench, right?
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
I don't know if we have.
Because we had some good people, and we had a lively discussion about the talent and the interest in serving on that board?
I'll have to check. I'm
Okay.
not sure who's on the bench right there.
Okay, thanks.
Member Stewart?
Thank you. Manager Neal, did I hear you say that the council appoints 3 and the HRA appoints 2, and this is one of the seats the HRA appoints?
That's correct.
So is it not their process rather than our process?
No, you're the HRA.
Oh, I'm
so-
sorry. I thought I was thinking the foundation. Okay.
Yeah, the foundation. The
Sorry.
foundation traditionally has given the council input on who they'd like on their
Oh, good.
board, and then we've not always handled this through our regular boards and commissions process. The last couple appointees we have, so Jerry Gilligan we did, and Ann Swenson we did.
So my thought, I agree with Member Brindle that if we can start with the bench that we have, but also why not enable other people who are hearing this call for talent to submit their own resumes and their interest?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's any reason to cut it off.
Okay.
Another question, with respect to Doug Mayo, would he continue to serve until such time as his successor is appointed, or is he off immediately based on the fact that he's moved out of the
The
community?
way our bylaws are written, he is off. He's
Okay.
out right now.
So filling this sooner rather than later is important.
Right.
I wonder if we could do some attenuated process where we could see who is interested and pick somebody and try to do it within the next month. Can they function within
Sure.
the next month without him? So does that seem like a logical way to approach it? This expedited process? And I agree with my colleagues that we should give not only the bench a chance to reassert their interest, but anyone else that's interested as well.
Okay, we'll set it up.
Okay.
Thank you. The other item is on my list was the HRA position on Grandview Green. We included a proposal in your packet, and there's one in front of you at the dais that I think was just had a typographical change to it. Bill?
That's correct. Member Fisher had some editorial changes that he suggested.
Okay, so are there more changes in this than was in the packet, or is it just that one word that I'm seeing?
Member Fisher?
So what I'm proposing is that one word gets replaced with the sentence below in red.
Okay.
I'm just not adept enough at editing PDFs to have made that more clear.
Okay.
And just for the council's sake, what I'm trying to do is, first of all, I thought this first draft was really very good in terms of capturing the essence of what we all talked about. This sentence that I'm adding is just, I thought the missing piece that at least I was very concerned about and put on the table, and I thought that would help capture the overall essence.
Councilmember Fisher, HRA Member Fisher, and members, I think it does as well. It reinforces the idea that this is a complicated, integrated potential project, and other things have to happen for it to be enabled to happen too, right? Is that the...
Yeah, and maybe not to let an opportunity go by the wayside here. I think as I listened to all my colleagues at I think it was our last meeting, where we talked about our perspective on Grandview Green, I don't think any of us saw it as a project that's going to start in the near term, that it's a long-range vision. And there are a lot of things that have to happen that would make that a possibility. And I think what I hear out in the community about most things we talk about, people perceive these changes and imagine more people, more cars, more activity with the same infrastructure we have today. And I think the key when we're doing this long-range planning is that infrastructure changes, technology changes, lots of things change that enable us to see that future. And it's our job today to sort of try to figure out what that might be and plan for it. And that's why I think this really captures that well. This isn't talking about a project that's going to happen. It talks about an opportunity that we want to make sure can happen if all the right pieces fall in place. So I think it's a good document for that purpose.
Thanks for those comments. In that second full paragraph in the middle of that paragraph, I was uncomfortable with the sentence that says the initial studies indicate that this long-term concept has viability to be successfully financed and constructed. Well, we know that that was accurate based on full build-out, full density. Our council and this HRA has never determined whether this is a project that would move forward or whether it would ever be viable. So I'm thinking that we should strike that sentence, the initial studies sentence, and then have that following sentence read, the construction of the lid, if viable, will deliver upon the guiding principles established on page 7. I think that's an incendiary sentence. It shouldn't be in there. So I like Member Fisher's proposed change. I think it's a really critically important change because that's one of the things that folks worry about is the capacity of our existing transportation system to handle anything that involves an increase in density or height. Does anybody else have any other thoughts? You know, I think you could redraft this and bring it back.
So that was my
We've got time.
question for you, Mr. Chair, is that what the action being proposed or requested to council today is not very specific. So your options are, we could adopt this as you've amended it at the dais. We can, and what that does is proposes it into the proposed comprehensive plan, which then still has some level of public engagement to it before it's finalized by a vote of the council. So this isn't the last word on this subject, even if you approved it today. Or you could give us that direction, we can redraft it, and we could bring it back to you at your next HRA meeting in October.
I guess I'd prefer that it come back when we have Member Staunton here too. So I don't know if somebody would want to make a motion to that effect, have it redrafted with the changes proposed and have it come back to us at our next HRA meeting.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried.
We'll be back to you in October.
Okay. I think that takes care of the items A, B, and C under your
It does.
section of the agenda. And then we will move back to 6. And we'll have an introduction in open meeting, open session, before we moved into closed session. So I think Mr. Neuendorf, our Economic Development Manager, has a presentation, and then we're also going to have a presentation by our development partner, Frauenschuh Companies.
Yes, thank you and good morning. So our primary discussion this morning is regarding the potential sale of real estate at 5146 Eden Avenue, a site that we've been talking about on and off during this year and as well as in past years. In July of this summer, we presented a potential term sheet of laying out a potential transaction or sale of a portion of that site. That document was discussed on July 26th. And the general terms are included in the packet just for reference. Since we had that discussion, there's been no changes to that document. But when we had the discussion in July, staff raised a few concerns, a few issues that we weren't able to reach final agreement on with our development partner, Frauenschuh. And this group, after lengthy discussion, suggested and urged us to seek an appraisal to determine the value of the property. So we, in late July or first day of August, we engaged a third-party independent appraisal company, GTRE, a local firm that we've used in the past. They have over 20-some years of experience with their primary appraiser, and he did prepare an independent appraisal to determine the value of about 1.5 acres of that 3.5-acre site. That appraisal is included in your packet for discussion in the closed session. That's part of the reason that we've scheduled that closed session. Staff reviewed the appraisal. We discussed it as the firm got started. And then when they were finished, we reviewed it in-house, both myself as well as the city's appraisal staff in our assessing department. We found the appraisal to be reliable. We had some questions initially that we reached out to the appraiser about. He was able to answer each and every one of our questions with great specificity, which to me inspired more confidence in his appraisal. The value that he determined for the portion of the site was significantly higher than the value that is in the potential term sheet. And over the course of this whole process about this parcel, we've always had conversations about, the financials are important, but they're not the most important thing. We've always, for years, since the 2012 and 2010 committees, we've talked about delivering a fantastic project to the community. And so part of the challenge in this whole discussion is, how does the city get a fair deal and get the best deal and still deliver a great project? So with the appraisal, the appraised value is higher than that currently proposed. We've discussed this with our team over at Franchu. They are not in agreement with the appraised number. And David Anderson and Alan Hill are here with us this morning. They would like to give us a brief presentation to update where they are on in their thinking. And then ultimately, we're all available for any questions. Nick Anhut with Ellers, the city's financial advisor, is also here if there's any questions. Happy to have any questions or conversations in the open session, but we did specifically reserve the closed session so that we can, as a group, go and discuss the pros and cons of the options that are in front of us. One reminder is that the preliminary development agreement is a contract that we started last December, and the deadline is fast approaching. We've extended that deadline in the past, but currently we have until the 28th of September to make a decision. And if you recall, that the terms of the contract are that as we've gone through this initial process, the city pays for our costs, the developer pays for their costs. Their costs are much higher. They've engaged architects on several occasions to do various site plans. So if we choose to move forward, we move on the same path and each party incurs our costs. If we choose to break off the conversation, we would be required to reimburse Franchu for either a portion of their costs or all of their costs. And that's where that September 28th deadline kicks in. If we can make a timely decision, we're still responsible for reimbursing them for part of their costs. There's been a lot of work done. Their architect is in the audience as well. If we do not satisfy that deadline, then we would be required to pay all of their costs, which would be about double. Just wanted to remind us why we're having a discussion and why there's kind of a timeline in front of us. But I'll leave my remarks at that and turn it over to David and Alan with Franchu to give an update of where they are. And then, as I mentioned, we're happy to answer any questions.
Good. All right, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Neundorf at this point in time? All right, thank you. Mr. Anderson, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Morning.
Commissioners, good morning. Thank you. Mr. Chair, Commissioners, good morning. Dave Anderson with Franchu, 7101 West 78th Street. And thank you for having us this morning. The follow-up to prior discussions in July and prior to that have been, I think, all very useful and productive in getting us here today. What we wanted to cover today is a bit of the process we entered into last December. Really, the thrust of this, I think, from the beginning, going back even to 2014, and really for the AHRA and City Council back to 2012, was the Grandview District Development Framework. and the 7 guiding principles. And when we engaged in this, we really used that process, the process you and the community put valuable time into to let it lead to this development plan, this public-private development collaboration that we've been working on. So a brief history really is just that. 2010, when the site became vacant, led to the Grandview Development Principles. We spent time in 2014 looking at a variety of development scenarios for the site, one of which, following that, was looking at the site entirely for community center use, 100% public use in 2016. I think since that time, in December of 2017, when we re-engaged, we really started to dig into this idea of a public-private redevelopment of the site, and how could we accomplish that? And to do that collaboratively, one of the foundational points was maintaining 60% of the site, the majority of the site, in public use. So really trying to deliver the remainder of the site into a viable, private, complementary, catalytic redevelopment project that also follows the 7 guiding principles really have been the focus for us. So the result of that, of course, has been to look at a number of scenarios. Those principles, again, that I think are reflected in the plan that we have today are about bringing district parking as part of some of the community function elements, the eventual community development piece of the project. Affordable housing, which is incorporated. One thing we've pulled together in this plan is integrated affordable units into the project, 10% of the units at 50% area median income. And that is part of the plan, and it's part of what drives the economics on the project, because those are fixed capped rents on a certain number of units that will carry on for a number of years, and that economic factor gets built into the pro forma, gets built into the returns, therefore gets built into how a private investor can look at land price. So we'll talk a bit more with you about that. The market rate housing, at this point, we are looking at a market rate product. This isn't 55 plus age restricted. This isn't ownership occupied. It's market rate. We're intending to serve a broad market of residents competing with other projects that offer a product with similar types of rents. We're not shooting for the highest rents in the market. We're not shooting for the lowest rents of the market. This is a high quality product that's going to deliver great opportunities for a broad section of the market. Why have we pursued that? We think it fits within the 7 guiding principles of Grandview. We think with senior housing being built today, we think with other housing that exists, we think with the community infrastructure that good market rate housing with a workforce element of housing available, affordable, is a nice way to add some dynamic activity to the Grandview district. So we can talk a bit more about what that means versus other potential options we could look at. The new finished building for the Arts Center, I think in the last couple of months there's been more focus back on that topic of what are the needs for the community, what are the feasibility factors involved with how that facility would be programmed and the like. And we've certainly been interested and eager to know how that may come together. But one thing we've done with this current plan is we've allowed for phase 1, the private phase, to be built, and then for that decision on the public phase ultimately to be phase 2, to come in at a subsequent phase. So that sequencing has been important, I think, in arriving where we're at today. As Mr. Neuendorf mentioned, we have a term sheet drafted. We've spent a considerable amount of time putting the terms together to move this forward. The site itself, for the residential portion, which would be the southern portion of the site, left side of your screen, is 1.39 acres in size. So we've studied how we build the project on the site to self-contain its parking, to allow it to be a complementary featured development adjacent to a civic plaza public green that we've talked a lot about certainly with the HRA and the staff about a real active, open, multifunctional gathering space, and we still think that vision is exciting and has some great potential. We'd love to see it along with the community center. So the remainder of the site, as we said, after the 1.39 acres is the balance of that north portion of the site being available for public use, essentially 60% of the site. Our timing right now, we're ready to proceed, would be to complete land use entitlements approvals by the end of the year or early part of next year, and to start the project in the spring with completion of this development in the summer of 2020. Just a brief look at that schedule and how things would proceed here at this point. If we were able to proceed on the term sheet over the next remainder of September, perhaps October, we could get the proper documents in place, begin that due diligence and entitlements process, site plan approvals into early 19, and then a start in spring of 2019. Just to jump back for a moment on the discussion on land price, and I think it certainly, as Mr. Neuendorf mentioned, was a topic at the July meeting, and a topic we've spent a great deal of time talking with you about how do we arrive at a land price. I'll make the comment on the appraisal that our question on the appraisal that was conducted wasn't taking exception to the number the appraiser arrived at. It was what they were appraising. We talked about determining the value for the proposed scope of development. So to determine the value for this site or its proposed scope of development, because we've been working in collaboration to arrive at a plan that provides the complementary components, is different than just saying, what could we get if we just went out and got the highest and best price for this property. So I think that has to be taken into consideration here because there's a distinction. We didn't approach the project that way. I think we set up some pretty specific parameters when we started this process. We've designed the site and planned the site with some limitation. There are some limitations as a result of how we plan. We define this as 60% of the site being available to public and civic use. So with that, we somewhat cap our density, if you will, in the south, because we have to self-contain our parking, and parking becomes a driver. Your ability to park your project also determines your level of density in units. And so we're at 143 units with 1 parking space per bedroom and a few employee and guest parking spaces. We've redesigned the parking so it parks entirely under the building, 2 levels under the building. So we can really contain that private development on that 1.39 acre parcel. So that's really the parameters we're working with there. We've incorporated 10% affordable housing at 50% AMI. Now there's probably projects out there that are in the comp set. They may not even be market rate housing. It could be 55 plus age restricted. They might be owner occupied. They might be projects with commercial development components. But the point is, we're talking about a very specific level of rents, and we have an affordable housing obligation built into this. So that does impact the economics of the development. But we've incorporated that, we embrace it, we think it's a great part of the project. So we don't dismiss the idea that that's what we're trying to accomplish, but it has to be recognized in the discussion about land value. So we think, if the approach was, let's just take this 1.39 acre parcel, let's put it on the market and see what we can get for it, you'll see what you can get for it. You may get another 55 plus senior housing proposal. I think the question you would probably want to discuss then is that what we're trying to accomplish at Grandview? We're building 165 units today. Grandview Square, I think, has a pretty high propensity of maybe empty nesters. But if we built another product because there's a driving force in the market today for senior housing, that may be your highest bidder. So, you have to really think about it if that's the direction we're going. I think when we step back and we look at it, we provided our pro formas to the team, Mr. Neuendorf and Mr. Onhattan and so forth. We provided all of our financial information to show how the market rate product functions in the market at a level of rent with construction costs, with land costs, with all the various factors to produce a level of return that has to be financeable. And that's really where we're at today. So the good news is we've provided, in the information we provided to the HRA, some land comparisons of projects we think are reasonable to really look at. Our land price at 1.39 acres is $2.15 million per acre. I think you'll see some very recent projects in your community, and some others, you'll be surprised, that number far exceeds it. This project has a 10% affordable requirement, and we will build affordable units. We're not proposing a buyout, we will build affordable units. But you'll also see other projects, notable projects in your community, that are very comparative and competitive with that land price. So that's why we've provided some information on projects that we think are more competitive and similar. So that would be our commentary. You know, we're not taking issue with, hey, can I go out and find some comps and show you a higher number than what we've been talking about in this process? Sure, no dispute with that. I think we're talking about, were we valuing this property for the development that's proposed, that we've been working on as a team here for many, many months, or are we just simply saying, let's see what we could get using comparables? Because some of those comparables used in that appraisal are not market rate product, 10% affordable obligation, similar in scope. There's no tax increment financing in this project. There's others in the marketplace that benefit from that as well. So we'll just leave that at that, and we'd be happy to answer any other questions. I may have Mr. Vanelli just step up and talk a bit about the finance portion of this, because we know you'll talk about this in the closed session, because the land price is an important topic. We understand that. So we just want to make sure the best information is available to you so you can understand how we've looked at this together and maybe how we can continue forward. So,
All right. Thanks, Mr. Anderson.
thank you.
Thanks, David.
Vanelli,
Good morning.
Would you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. My name is Mark Vanelli, and I'm with Bellwether Enterprise Real Estate Capital. We are a
And your
full-service,
business address, Mr. Vanelli?
225 South 6th Street, Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Thank you.
David had asked me if I would make a few comments based on my observation of this this process, the dynamic related to the value of the property, and how this has been brought before you to make decisions based on what you believe is the highest and best price you can get for this property. As a full-service mortgage banking firm, our responsibility is to take a look at developments and establish the value based on what our institutional investors are willing to lend against them. And only one of the components in establishing value is land value. There are three components to an appraisal: income approach, market approach, and the replacement approach in a commercial real estate appraisal. The current discussion is centered around the land value, which is generally part of the replacement approach. So you establish the land value, and then you establish what it would cost to replace the property. Usually we use this for insurance purposes. The other two approaches, though, are related to market approach in the sale of a property based on other sales of properties of like kind. And the third is the income approach, which is the predominant favorite to be used, because that's essentially what's driving the financing. Because the financing is generally based on debt service coverage. So whatever you can borrow in the marketplace, the amount of equity, that will determine how much equity you'll put into the project, and then the equity, that determines on what your revenue or your cash flow from the property will determine your return on that equity. So what we've discovered in this particular case is that if you look at the income approach, which is essentially the maximum amount we can generate in revenue per square foot, and subtract from that the expenses, the projected expenses on a project like this, using other projects in the marketplace, using today's rents, and what projected taxes will be, et cetera. So what we looked at, just for your consideration, is we looked at what other projects rent for on a per square foot basis that would be comparable to this location, and established a unit mix accordingly. And we looked at what the expenses would be based on a projected expense per square foot, or per unit in this case, and we looked at what essentially taxes would be as one half of that equation, and what the operating expenses would be. And we did this based on other comparable properties in this marketplace. So we think what we did was exactly the way most developers would look at this in order to establish what would be a necessary rate of return, and then determine what we can borrow at and use that in by calculating what your return on investment is. Those returns are moderate by most standards. There's not a very healthy cushion in terms of unknown or unforeseen circumstances that could come up. In other words, the return on cost, so that's the net operating income divided into the cost. The return on cost is generally, you try to achieve 7%. And in this particular case, if you combine the projected the costs of construction and the development soft costs and the land cost, you are sub 7%. In fact, you're quite a ways below 7%, at a level where it starts to become quite risky if you start paying more for the land that's already being contemplated. So I just want you to think about not just what an appraised value of land is, without any understanding, or without any consideration, I should say, of what you have to take into consideration relative to the revenue being generated per square foot by the maximum amount of units we can fit on the site based on restrictions. And the restrictions are height, width, length, depth, and parking. So we looked at this as many ways as we possibly could think of. And I don't believe anybody commands a different mousetrap here in terms of how they can put what's been proposed on this site, that within the constraints that are made available to them. And again, that includes the site itself, the physical constraints of the site itself, the parking constraints based on how much parking you can actually include without starting to borrow parking from somewhere else, which is why I think this was appropriately modified to take the parking away from underneath the green space, the deck, because I think that to me, we were forcing more into this than we needed to, and cost. And I believe that new design, which by the way, constrains the property, because we can't push parking over there now. We took the parking away. So the only place you can go is down, underneath the footprint. So I get it. I can understand how somebody would be able to tell you that this property is worth more than what's being offered. The problem is they haven't spent 5 months looking at innumerable ways of which you can try to do this that all come back to essentially the amount of square footage that's now allowable in this 143 units. So you could add units, you could start taking away affordable units, but as we've continued to discover, you push this thing and you got to pull somewhere else, like a balloon. You push it in and it's coming out somewhere else. And we thought about this notion of moving the affordable, again, outside of the building itself and establishing a freestanding building, but we determined that in order for that to be practical, the affordable people that do this for a living, the nonprofits, they need a bigger project to make sense of it from an economies of scale. So that's why we brought it back into our project where we didn't need to do the economies of scale because we could utilize the market rate units. So you see, what we're trying to explain is that it didn't just, there's no rabbit in a hat here. It is what it is. There isn't any more square footage we can build. We just can't. And so there's only so much you can pay for land when you have to add all these other costs in conjunction with these returns, in conjunction with where market borrowing and interest rates are. And so all these factors come in to give you your return on cost. It's as simple as that, return on cost. And if you can't get to your return on cost, it starts to become very difficult to take on that risk for a developer. And so I think that the price that's being offered based on the current return on cost and the attention that's been paid to detail in terms of how this will marry nicely with the rest of the civic part of the development is really a nice marriage. It's a nice combination right now. So anyway, I just wanted to explain to you that it isn't just about valuing a piece of land. It's about a whole concert of items that come into play when looking at the overall value of a development. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rinelli.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I'll wrap up here just briefly. And the one item I'd add to this, just in closing, is the other approach we've taken to this project, and that is to be the long-term owner and holder of this investment. And we think that's significant because there is another delivery model out there in the marketplace, and that is simply to merchant build a development in which you build the project and you stabilize it or pre-sell it or sell it upon stabilization into the capital market. And that becomes a transaction type that with current capitalization rates and pricing is driving up a number of transactions in terms of price and the fact that the developer is going to exit and profit immediately from that transaction. So our approach has been, again, we've been a partner for a long time. We've continued to look at this as something we would remain invested in. We would continue. There's a lot of agreements here that will go on into time and have these two projects working synergistically. And that's always been our vision of it. Our vision hasn't been to build this thing, take advantage of the capital market, and transact and get out. It just hasn't. So therefore, we've also looked at the quality. And I think the quality is reflected in some of the factors we've built into our vision of this, and that is to be a mark for quality in the marketplace. Be competitive in rents, but also be a mark for quality. We think Grandview wants it. We think Grandview deserves it. We think Edina deserves it. So that, I think, is another distinction in how we've looked at the project. I think at this point, our design team is here. Others from our team are here. We can answer questions, and we do appreciate the time. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, thanks for that presentation. It was helpful. Questions now for either Mr. Nuendorf or any member of the Frauenschuh team? Okay. All right. So we're going to go into closed session to discuss this. So I need a motion to close the meeting pursuant to Minnesota Statutes 13D.05, Subdivision 3, to discuss the potential sale of real property located at 5146 Eden Avenue. This is an action by voice vote. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second?
Got a motion and second to move into closed meeting pursuant to MSA 13D.05 Subdivision 3. Any further discussion? All those in favor of moving into closed session as provided by state statute, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. We will now move to the community room for our closed session conversation. As folks know, the HRA was in closed session. We moved back into open session, and we are now reconvening the meeting. This is all with regard to the potential sale of real estate at 5146 Eden Avenue in our community. And I'm going to, based on that closed session, I'm going to ask whether there is a motion to proceed or not to proceed with a potential real estate transaction with Frown Shoe Companies on the portion of the property at 5146 Eden Avenue.
I'll make a motion to terminate the preliminary agreement with Frown Shoe and initiate a process to select a buyer and developer at more favorable terms to the HRA. I don't, actually, that probably does more than what I think we even need to do.
So
I'll just make
I
a
could
motion
ask
to-
you, if you would, is there a motion, would you consider making a motion
Just to
not
terminate the
not to
preliminary
proceed
agreement,
with a
yeah.
potential real estate transaction with Frown Shoe Company?
So moved.
All right.
Thank you.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. We talked in closed session about bringing up in open session what members' thoughts might be on next steps. And I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that. We'll need to head in some particular direction here with respect to this property. Member Fisher?
I thought we would want to just have either a work session or a designated time to when Commissioner Staunton's here to talk about what we want to do for next steps.
Manager Neal, could you set this up as we think about the future of this site, set up a work session sooner
Yes.
rather than later? We can start thinking about ideas.
I will.
that
I'll
we might
confer
have.
with Councilmember
Yeah.
Staunton about that.
Okay. All right. Thank you to our good friends at Frown Shoe Companies. You did very, very good work here. And we'll talk at a work session. You're sure welcome to attend as we think about what to do next year. And I think it begs a broader question about what to do with all the acreage at this site and the public component as well. So thank you, everybody, for all your good efforts here. It's really greatly appreciated. All right, is there any other business for the HRA this morning?
When is our next meeting? Do we have another meeting in September? I do not have one on my calendar.
Commissioner Brindle and members of the HRA, earlier this year, we did a reduction in the number of scheduled HRA
Right.
meetings. And one of the meetings that was reduced or eliminated was the planned meeting for Thursday, September 27th. So
Okay.
you might still have that on your calendar, but if you do, that meeting has been officially canceled. So the next scheduled meeting of the HRA is Thursday, October 11th.
Great, thank you. Just wanted to confirm.
All right. All right, any other business for the HRA? We stand adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Did I hear that right? So